This is Cohesion, Concepts and Context, where we unpack and explore everything from architecture to the human experience around design. I'm Malek Alqadi. In today's episode, Masterclass Lessons from Design Titans and Building a Sustainable Future, we explore concepts with the masters of their field and working with people like Axel, Vervoodt, James Turrell, and what I learned as a young designer from interacting and working with these individuals. I have John Buffini here with me. How's it going, John?
Going great. I'm
looking forward to discussing this episode and these topics and, talking about my experience with working with these.
And I'm looking forward to you not being shy, because you've had some incredibly profound experience with truly masterful people and sharing your perspective, the humanity of your interaction, your takeaways. Those can be so profound for those listening. And, growing up in Ireland, we had a fourth generation business. So 4 generations of my family did this business where mastery was required. And to even join the business, you had to have 4 years under direct tutelage before you would even be considered a professional. And so I think in our digital world, when we think of mastery, we think of something way faster. And so you, as a up and coming architect, a young man going into maturity, have been around mature creative masters. And so I want you to kind of counterintuitively not be shy when talking about these experiences, because there's a lot of takeaways that people can have in this podcast.
For sure. And I don't know if it's shyness per se, but I think it's more kind of processing what experiences one has just gone through and how to take those things in, especially with the level of access that was available to me and being able to tap into that and taking it in as a sponge. I mean, was already working in the field for 10 years when I started working with these individuals. But even then, it, just seemed like there was still so much to learn and so much to do. And taking all of that in context and being able to process all of the various conversations and dialogues and experiences that were occurring in real time and how these individuals responded to different case studies, projects. And it was really, really profound experience that takes time to, unpack, process and really understand, unpack, because it's something that you could, you hear about, you kind of get little glimpses of here and there, whether it's through like a publication, editorial, or general interviews, but to have a sit down and an actual one-on-one dialogue and really understand how their perspective works and how they got to that point, and the perseverance and the process and the work ethic that's involved in to even be considered a master in your field is really profound to me. And so I think it's exciting to be able to discuss that with our listeners and, talk about like how one could really explore mastery of their own field and what that niche looks like to them and how to explore that as much as possible and how to master it. Because I feel like a lot of people kind of, in today's society at least, kind of just, they drill, what is it, the saying that you say? It's like 2 inches down, but
2 inches deep and a mile wide.
Yeah. And it's like you never go anywhere because there's so many distractions and there's so many moving parts that you can't really hone in on something that you can be an expert on. And I think there should be a pivot to that and a change to that as we explore, it's episode 1, season 2, and we kind of set the tone for this new season of Concepts and Context.
I think it's also we have to factor in a little bit of surreal. And if we unpack surreal, it's an openness and a boldness or a courage to experience things. You had sent me a picture of you standing on a table between, a mogul and James Turrell, and you were doing something on top of the table, measuring something. And the oxygen left my lungs. I was just like, what is this? There was so much data and information in that. But one of the things I unpacked was your willingness and openness to be between these two creative behemoths contributing. And I think that's what I'd love listeners to come away with is, where can you find some courage to be open in your area of life? And so,
I think what was a great perspective too is to be open to learning new perspectives and process as much information as possible while contributing to the conversation, and listening and taking in as much data as possible, and knowing when to jump in and to add value to that dialogue, whether it's a design charrette, doing a design charrette that day, and we were exploring a few different things in Flagstaff, Arizona, after our tour at Road and Crater, and exploring the new build outs there. And it was just,
can you explain to our listeners what actually the crater is?
So Road and Crater is located in Flagstaff, Arizona, and it's designed by James Turrell, who is an amazing artist who, it's essentially an inverted volcanic cone transformed into a large-scale artwork nestled in the Mojave Desert of Arizona. It's created by the American artist James Turrell. It's an immersive environment designed to explore light, space, and perception.
And what a space. I mean, the fact that he's illuminating an ancient wonder, which is a crater itself, and then somehow connecting it to mankind using light.
100%. It's 400 feet deep and a half-mile wide. I mean, It's sculpted by ancient volcanic forces, and then James Turrell. It's such a perfect canvas for his vision and what he's doing and contributing to the arts, and to do that with something so magnificent as light, and to play on light and space, and using architecture as a medium to be able to convey that is so inspiring to see. And over the 4 decades that he's been, meticulously reshaping this crater and creating these tunnels and ramps and chambers within its depths, these spaces manipulate light and shadow in a spectacular way, playing tricks on your perception as you maneuver through them. And the idea is that was so connecting for me, building my off-grid follies out in the middle of my corner of the Mojave Desert, and my connections to stargazing portals and places where you could stay at Folly Joshua Tree, or the new location Folly Mojave. And it's all about alignments and connection to the celestial skies above. And with him being able to chase the sun, and the key elements of Road and Crater is its connection to the celestial dance of the sun, precisely placed apertures throughout the structures that capture the sunrise and sunset at specific points, transforming the interior and playing with light and shifting patterns. And it just gives you this kind of out of this world atmosphere that you can't really put your finger on. All you can do is it's very ethereal, and you just kind of experience it. It's an immersive experience, and this is the best way I can explain it. As you go through the passages and interplay of light and dark, and you can see how his work goes through all of these different phases over the decades, and the detailing, and it's just all so inspiring, and it's so magnificent to experience firsthand, and to be able to spend that amount of time there to kind of escape from the familiar of what we know and understand, and it allows you kind of to ponder a lot of the vastness of the universe through these like tunnels and apertures and portals that you get to see the sky above. And then at the same time being in this really immersive space, it's genuinely to be a unique artistic and an astronomical destination for sure.
Well,
when it's completed.
From a characteristic standpoint, I think both of you have this in common, and a lot of listeners will have this in common, is taking the invisible, like lassoing the invisible and turning it into something practical, experiential, interactive. And if you look at what you created from the harshness of your environment and Turrell's environment and added creativity interacting within that harshness, and it's allowed for amazing experiences. And I think people out there have the ability to take something invisible, like an inspiration, an idea, creativity, and bring it to life. And I think that's what I'd love people to take away from that. But it is something to experience the harshness of a Mojave landscape and the comfort, the symmetry, the light, the beauty of one of your creations interacting with that. And they both Turrell and yourself have that surrealness. And I think people can dabble in surreal creativity themselves and have the courage to kind of follow through on that.
For sure. And I think as people are like, oh yeah, I want to do this, especially like, January, New Year, doing XYZ. Everybody's like on their posting this is what's going to happen. I kind of like pull away from it because and to me, it's like, okay, if say last year wasn't the ideal year, it's like, what's the continuation or the refinement of what can be done better, or what's the next right move when something is so overwhelming or so ongoing, especially with like architectural projects and design work and things that take so much time that span a few years' time. And what a new year does provide is perspective to me in my point of view, because what I did is like, where was I a year ago on the Folly Mojave project, and how evolved was I from 12 months ago to now. And that was the easiest way to see the amount of work and dedication and effort that went into creating something that does not have a precedent before, with all of the self-sustainable aspects to the project, the complexities of something so simple that we take so for granted because it's provided by public utility to have and create and do it at a scale or spanning over 200 acres is just mind-boggling sometimes. And it is so overwhelming because it is practically, it's like a one-man show of putting this whole thing together. And
it's slow transformation. It's a slow transformation that digital audiences don't necessarily gel with immediately.
100%. And you don't, because everything is so fast, go, you kind of forget all of the embodied energy that goes into certain things.
Yes,
and I was just exploring. I was like, I'm going to look at one memory from every month and just see how far along things have gotten. And it's crazy because photos don't lie. And it's pretty wild to be in the space now and being able to enjoy it. And then seeing where it was a year ago and the amount of work that's gone into it. So I think that's kind of a great stepping stone, is when there is a lot of overwhelm, because I am so global and I think big picture all the time, is to just like take a seat back and then just look at, okay, what's the next right move and how do you focus on that? And I always have a hard time with it too. It's not something that comes easy. We always talk about it, you and I. It's like, how do we navigate those kinds of things?
I have to say, it took me about 1 month to unpack mentally the experience of my first time at Mojave. I was awestruck and
And it
delighted.
wasn't even finished yet.
And it wasn't even finished yet. And it just, I don't know. I think when people create, there has to be some type of delight around the process. Otherwise, why are you doing it? You know what I mean? It's too punishing if there isn't some type of delight in that. My last question on James Turrell is a human one, is what was your takeaway from James as a person or an experience? What's a takeaway that you have from this surreal master experience?
It was just his love for the work. 4 decades in, the property, his storytelling was just so inspiring to be in his presence and to be able to just learn from just from simple conversations and perspectives on things. I think we get so caught up in all of these little things and realize there's such like a bigger picture, and just seeing the fact that he took matters in his own hands and creating that creator and creating such a wonderful experience for himself, really, first, because it's not even open to the public. And so it's, by invite by permission, it's not even fully like completed yet. And there's certain aspects of it that is finished, and and it has been, but then there's, other things that he's still working on and whatnot. But it was just really, really empowering to listen to his conversations and his love for the work that he does, and his and the continuation of the perseverance and dedication to that work. And it kind of really grounded me, because I was like, oh my God, I'm a year and a half in, and I'm still not anywhere with this project or this project. And it's like, and even just doing kind of perspectives on like, okay, Pharma Hobby is now 4 years in, and the amount of embodied energy and work that's gone into it. But it makes sense when you look at it in hindsight, like everybody says, hindsight's 2020. So that was just, I think, just the overall atmosphere and being in his presence and having those conversations and doing those case studies and workshops and really just taking that in. I'll be, forever grateful for having that opportunity with a master like him.
The other thing that I find interesting is with mastery, and even mastery interacting with the creative process, you sure don't necessarily have to have the exact same personality. And so, if you're switching from James to Axel, that's almost whiplash in terms of their creativity. Do you want to talk about Axel and why you were inspired by him?
Yeah, for sure. And I think with Axel, it was a different type of inspiration. It was like what Axel strives for, and the perspectives and from like an art collection standpoint, and his
The
viewpoints
beauty of
on
the imperfection. I mean, he really is
yeah, and everybody's so concerned about like over-engineered everything, hyper-engineered this, super sleek modern this. It becomes so like boring. There's a place and time for different contexts and programs and buildings. I'm not dismissing that at all, but there is something spectacular about taking found objects that have so much history and placing them in spaces and giving them new life, or breathing new life into them by placement and curation. And it's really wonderful to experience that and the importance of it. With Axel, it gave me a new appreciation on wabi sabi and that design aesthetic, and
You want to give a little
that.
explanation of what that is to the audience?
Yeah. So wabi sabi is, how do I explain it in a simple way? It derives from it's a Japanese aesthetic concept centered around finding beauty in imperfections and in incompleteness. It's all about embracing the natural world and accepting like time and how things age with time, and appreciating the unique character of things that have been shaped by use and age versus something that's hyper engineered. And so like with Wabi Sabi, it's kind of like it celebrates all of the things that we might not find appealing at the beginning. So like things that are not perfectly symmetrical, that have craft pottery or hand woven textiles, uneven stitching, the human element to things, weathered wood. There's just like all of these different elements that come into that philosophy, and how all things are temporary and ultimately fade away. And so it teaches us to find the beauty of the fleeting moments and appreciate the ever-changing nature of life and time, because that's something that's ongoing and that we can't really control. And so it's all about like those values of simple natural forms, materials, and organic textures and uncluttered spaces. So Axel would always say, like, what's a utilitarian space, where you have like function for things to get done and need, but then there's sacred spaces. And I always love that. And I always use that as a filter between like, what's a sacred space to this project and what's really important to convey, and how does it lend itself to light and view, and it could be sacred in a multitude of different ways, whether it's geometry, whether it's time, whether it's connection, and utility is more kind of like program and focusing on things that need to be done back of house or whatever that program may be, but things that are not necessarily focused on sacred space, but more just for things that need to get done through utility.
And I have to say, I've noticed an evolution in you. You are a perfectionist. You look at your body, your home, your business, your creations. What was striking to me when I was walking through Mojave, there's so much energy you've put into this creation. And there was a tiny chip in the 10-inch walls. And I go, "Oh, are you going to fix that?" And he goes, "No, that's part of the expression of the building." And I was like, who abducted you? Like the fact that you were able to embrace the human connection of creation, and the humanity of that, good and, weak or a mistake. I just thought that was absolutely fantastic in your paradigm shift. And I think that's part of the mastery of that.
For sure.
I think if you're an audience member going, "Oh, let me listen to a guy who's worked with a guy who illuminated a crater," and what about a guy who's created these spaces and bathrooms that don't look like bathrooms, and nature is exploding in, and the smoothness and symmetry and softness, and I mean, these are very, very uniquely gifted people, and you've had an opportunity to interact with and expound upon. And it's funny, and no disrespect to them, but James is almost like a creative miner using light. And then Axel is like this philosophical, intellectual master that the intellect happens to bump up to a creative expression. So I remember an interview he did about a Manhattan apartment he was doing, and it was all about the intellect and the philosophy and the expression before anything was even touched. Like what the need for a drawer, can you expound on some of the things that inspired you from this thought master, this thought leader into your work, your design?
I think for me, it allowed me to explore imperfections, to explore and appreciate found objects, to really lean into that idea of the human element and the ethos behind that, and how his philosophy really goes beyond um, just just the artwork, but the curation of that in sacred spaces, in um, the ode to imperfections, and just all of those different elements, and how to create these moments in time through space and vignettes. As you step into one space and get out of another space, which details are you focusing on? Which objects are being displayed? What's the purpose of that space? Uh, a lot of that, because I think in our society, there's just sometimes a lot of clutter and a lot of everything, and it's just so overwhelming. There's so much noise in our lives, and we're always trying to escape that by kind of decluttering our minds, and we do that through space. And so it's just, I think that resonated with me a lot through the discussions and dialogues, and taking in his work in real time.
I think one of the things for me as end user person who experiences your artwork, just the theme of how boulders suddenly show up in pristine environments, or they push themselves through the earth and find themselves in this ultra modern bathroom, or on a deck or under a stairway. It's the interplay of the artist and the creator, and then also the natural elements,
and the process, and it's the process of how to get to that result, because sometimes we start at a certain point thinking that it's going to be a certain way, and then you experience the process and all of these things that do come, all these factors that come into play as you're going through that process. So I think something that's really important that we've been kind of tapping in on through this episode is like, to start small, think about what's the next right move, be able to experiment, but don't get too lost in the experimentation, because you're trying to still get to a point. Learn from, not reinvent the wheel, but learn from the masters that already have done it by doing case studies or listening in on interviews, and reading through different project briefs. Don't be afraid to think differently, and every space and every design choice has the potential to ripple out and create a more beautiful and sustainable project, or design endeavor. And I think those are all really important things to explore.
My last question for the podcast is you are a young architect with a plethora of experiences with exposure to a lot of masters we haven't got into today. What's your sentence to people who are struggling with their art or trying to realize their vision, or thinking that they have to be insta perfect? What's your thought on mastery in the 21st century for a young designer?
Let's see. God, that's a loaded question. I mean, I'm still struggling with art myself. I think what I realized,
right there, it's the struggle. One of the things when I counsel,
it's embracing it. I think embracing the process, because it is part of the process, and sometimes it could be just like so frustrating, and it feels stagnant, and it feels like you're not going anywhere, and there's so much of that. But I think embracing it sounds so cliche, because I'm always dealing with that myself.
It's not cliche if you unpack that. I mean, what I do professionally is remind people about their humanity. And one of the things that passionate people is impatient with themselves. It's a side effect. And then the self-care of that is, how are you being gracious and forgiving to yourself as you're navigating that struggle. And I think humanizing your struggle, I think you couldn't have a more perfect answer than that, is to humanize your struggle.
And seek inspiration when you get stuck. I think that's something I always do. And seek inspiration in like new ways, not just scrolling. Or what is the new term? Doom scrolling.
Oh, doom scrolling.
And then you end up, you're like, what happened? Seek some inspo in new ways, whether it's from nature, your surrounding environment, or stepping out of that environment, going into something else. Focus on the process. And for me, at least, it's always like setting small, achievable goals. Even though I get so caught up in the macro all the time and the overwhelm of that. I know when we talk, we always try to be like, okay, what's the next right move? How do we navigate the next right thing? Because if you're looking at the bigger picture, even though we already have a game plan for it, it's still overwhelming because you might be at, base 2 and you're trying to get to, or mile 2 and you're trying to get to mile 99 in 3.5 seconds. It's a lot. So,
grounding your creativity with actionable items sounds very normal, but for creative people, it's a counterintuitive thing that they have to get in the practice of doing.
What would you give any advice from like your leadership and coaching standpoint as you've discussed things with clients? I know we're tapping into the architecture realm, but what advice would you give people as they start out their new year?
I have always admired creative people, whether they're visionaries in industrial or technology or simple art. The thing for me is that creative people usually can feel lonely at times because they're trying to do something that either hasn't been approached in that way before, or they have such a complicated narrative in their head that they haven't simplified away a statement and expression to be able to reach out to people to get their cooperation, support, or engagement. So I think the first thing is, how are you calibrating yourself as a creative person? How are you taking care of yourself? How are you, I'll embarrass you here, but Malek, you hydrate, you work out, and you eat well, but you fuel the entity, you fuel the creature that creates the creation. And sometimes I think people can forget their humanity by getting so immersed in their creativity. And it's a little bit of, how are you calibrating yourself? And then how are you creating and then reaching out to others for clarity or feedback, synergy, or even support? The greatest
when for me, sometimes I'm too immersed in it to even notice. Like, what are there some triggers that one be like, whoa, I need to do like a check-in, or is it when someone gets stuck? Like, is that
two things?
What advice would you give there?
Overwhelm and toxic self-talk. If you're experiencing overwhelm and toxic self-talk, you've already gone further without calibrating yourself. So if your toxic self-talk is really enthusiastic and you're feeling overwhelmed to the point of activity paralysis, that means you haven't reached out and you're not taking care of yourself. So those are two triggers that happen from within. But if you hear your toxic self-talk and you're feeling overwhelmed and it's been for a period of time, that means you've isolated yourself, and we need to turn you into a peninsula that connects to the mainland of the support mechanism around you. It is a fantastical thing to create something that can exist beyond you. And it also does not have to be done alone. And it also doesn't have to not joyful. So
it's art at the end of the day, and it's a form of expression. And
and how are you taking care of the human that's expressing it?
Exactly. Yeah, I like that. I appreciate your time, John, and being able to
really interesting stuff.
Yeah, I'm really excited for this season and everything that's going to be in the pipeline for what we have in store for everybody. So I think it's really exciting topics and really exciting discussions. And you're a master in your own field, so it's nice to talk to a master about masters.
Well, have a great rest of the day.
You too. Okay.